Spoiler season is upon us in Legends of Runeterra, and it is my favorite time of the year for any card game, Runeterra not excluded. And that is because whenever you have new cards that are revealed, you get to talk about their potential. You get to use your imagination. You get to theory craft. And I know this is going to sound weird. It's probably more information than you needed, but I'm the kind of person who just really values potential. I like to look at a pile of money and think about all the things that I could do with that money, as opposed to actually spending it. The spending of the money causes me a lot of anxiety. But if I just have money like in my bank account, I'm like, I could take a vacation with that. I could buy something really expensive. I could invest that. I like to think about all of the potential things that I could do. And so that's why I think I enjoy spoiler season so much. Now, it would be very easy to look at the 3 cards that we got today, because that's all we got, and be disappointed. You could say, hey, Riot, you're being stingy here. We got 3 cards. And on top of that, we only got 2 commons and 1 token card without the context for the token. So I would understand that point of view if you're one of those folks looking at this going, you know, hey, this isn't the best way to start things off. But I'm going to disagree. I'm going to say this was actually an amazing way to kick off spoiler season for a couple of reasons. Excuse me, my brain is going faster than my mouse because I'm really excited. So first of all, Riot also released a promotional video, kind of an advertisement, if you will, for the upcoming expansion that's coming on May 5th. And that had some great animation, and it included some champions. Now, you're going to notice when you watch the video, I'll put a link in the video description here so you can go watch that if you haven't seen it already. You're going to notice Zilean, you're going to notice Irelia, and you're probably going to notice Malphite. And that is what is also reflected in our card reveals today. So even though we don't get to see the champions yet, we kind of know which champions are coming in this expansion, because we know we're going to get Irelia, Zilean, and Malphite. And so with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and talk through the cards revealed today. So first up, we have Blade here. Blade is a 1-cost 1/1 that says obliterate me when I leave combat. Now this is interesting for a number of reasons that we kind of have to infer. First of all, you can't see it here, but the full art definitely shows Irelia. Given that this is a token card, I'm going to infer that this is something that Irelia creates. We don't know if it's her level 1 or her level 2, but she very clearly is creating something. The fact that you obliterate this card when it leaves combat also says to me it's probably something that enters play when she is attacking. Very similar to Zed, where Zed creates the ephemeral units. It would not shock me if Irelia somehow is creating these blades. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe she creates them in hand and then you play them. This does have a cost associated, obviously, but all token cards do, just in case they are bounced, etc., etc. But I suspect that we're going to have Irelia doing some really neat things on attack. They have talked about in the past that they wanted to reinforce Ionia's aggressive tendencies. That's why we saw that buff in Lulu in the last patch, and perhaps Irelia is a great way to continue that trend. We don't know much else, but I'm very at least curious to see what this champion is going to look like and what they do to kind of help Ionia out, because outside of Deny, Ionia's been struggling a bit as a region for a while. Let's be honest with ourselves. Sometimes we see the occasional Karma deck, but since elusives have fallen in their popularity as far as the aggressiveness goes, and since Targon has kind of come along and started to do some of the things Ionia used to do, but perhaps arguably a little bit better, Ionia has fallen in popularity. Now, Ionia does still have Lee Sin, and Lee Sin has been carrying that region, but when I talk about Ionia, I mean the region as a whole. You very rarely say, like, I want Ionia, the region, in my deck, the way you do with something like a Shadow Isles or a Freljord. What I mean by that is that sometimes when you're brewing, you might say, hey, I've got this deck idea, but I also know that I want the Freljord package. I want Frostbites. I want Avalanches. There are things that Freljord does as a region without even thinking about champions that you're like, yes, I want that in my deck. Shadow Isles is very similar, right? Whether it's the hard removal or the healing, or if you want to go in the other direction, the kind of slay, self-sacrifice feel, there's a region identity there. And so you say, like, hey, I want that in my deck, the region, not like I want to build around a champ. Ionia has Deny. Like, let's just be real here for a minute. Ionia has Lee Sin and Ionia has Deny. So I'm kind of hoping that they get a bit of a boost. I want to be excited to play Ionia again as a region, if you will, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they do. Let's talk about card number 2. Chip. I don't know why they led with Chip on day 1, because I don't know how you top Chip. Chip here is adorable. Chip is amazing. I need a little board cosmetic for Chip. I want Chip to have his own board, and I want him as a guardian. I would die for this little rock. This is the pet rock that we all wanted when we were a child. Chip is also very clearly leaning into the Malphite part of this reveal. Again, we know the 3 champions that are coming. They were kind of teased in that cinematic, so very clearly these are each supposed to represent something to do with their respective champions when we do eventually see them. And so Chip here, clearly bringing the Malphite game, but also bringing the adorable game, the cute game. Chip, it brings the puns. I said on Twitter today, and if you don't follow me there, you should, but I said that every time you attack with Chip, you need to say, I'm getting in some Chip damage, because it's just perfect. It's beautiful. So Chip here, as far as like, you know, actually talking about the card instead of just being excited at this adorable little thing. Chip is a 1-cost 1/1 in Targon, and it says, once you've summoned a landmark this game, grant me +2/+2. Now, I am very interested to see how this works, whether the +2/+2 exists in hand and in the deck, or if the grant triggers when you play it, but it's not listed here as a play effect. So this has the potential to be the equivalent of like a Bark Beast for Targon, where it's a 1-cost 1/1 that jumps to a 3/3 once you've met a condition. But it's just neat that it's likely going to be that 3/3 everywhere. Now, that doesn't matter for many interactions. I mean, we're not exactly looking to revitalizing Roar our 1-drops. So the fact that it goes from a 1/1 to a 3/3 in hand is probably not super relevant, but it does matter for summon effects. When you start talking about the potential of, let's say, Petty Officer summoning this, because again, it's not a play effect and it's not something that needs to trigger after it's already come into play. It's just if you've played a landmark this game, this could be a very big deal as far as 1-drops go. Now, it is in Targon and not Shurima that traditionally has a large number of landmarks. So I'm also very interested to see whether or not Targon kind of becomes a 3rd region where they emphasize landmarks. Targon already had Star-Tipped Peak along with Temple and had some potential there, and I think this could expand upon it. I was a big fan of trying to play Talia, for example, with Targon back when Temple was in its pre-nerf status, just because Temple was bonkers at that point. But I would like to see more reasons to maybe play landmarks with Targon, and it looks like Malphite might be just that reason. Now, again, we don't know what Malphite does, but if you watched the promo video, the big giant mountain of a Malphite. I mean, I know mountains and Malphite are hand in hand. I know Malphite basically is just a giant living mountain, but when you see it in the animated feature, he's like the size of a mountain. I feel like Malphite is going to get the Nautilus treatment, where instead of trying to make him fit his League of Legends champion flavor, they're going to go a little bit heavier on potential lore. And so it wouldn't shock me if Malphite ends up being something massive and something to do with landmarks. But we don't know. It's just fun to speculate and guess and infer. But Chip here, again, I think very powerful, potentially in the right deck. Just because even if you are playing something like a Targon Shurima and you are running the cheap Shurima landmarks on top of Peak, right? You could be running something that's just Targon Shurima aggro with Chip and with the Dune Keepers and things like that. Then also follow that up with cards like Preservarium and maybe even Star-Tipped Peak in place of traditional card draw, just to make sure that you never run out of gas. And maybe Chip fits into a deck like that. I don't know. Chip fits in something. Chip is a tier 0 card because that thing is adorable. So we're going to play it when it's released one way or the other. So we've covered the Irelia card. We've covered the Malphite card, if you will. So the last card is very clearly supposed to be Zilean themed. It's got Clockwork in the name. It is Clockwork Curator. I'll kind of move my head here a bit so you can see the full card. It's a 2-cost 2/2 in Shurima. And on play, you advance an allied landmark 2 rounds. Now, even without any other cards being introduced, I'm glad that something like this exists, because there are a number of landmarks that I think are kind of unplayable, at least on a competitive point of view, kind of unplayable in their current status, and something like this existing where you can speed them up and maybe get immediate value, and then also, even if it's just a mediocre body and a 2/2, getting something for doing it, I think, is a really big deal. This helps out mono Shurima decks. This helps out maybe grumpy decks, right? Maybe Frozen Thralls. Not playing Frozen Thrall on round 1 felt awful. Just awful. And so if we get this card and then maybe even just one other effect, maybe Frozen Thralls are a bit more bearable. We don't know. Maybe we only get this. But the fact that this card exists now, I think, is very important. And it's also really important because, again, if we want to start thinking about Talia support and her copying things, maybe you want to play Talia Lissandra where you get those Frozen Thralls down to 2 or down to 1, and then you copy it. I mean, that's the goal with Talia. You want her copy to be a very high impact play. And the way you do that is usually by speeding up your landmarks or trying to double their value, or doing things like that. And so, again, just the existence of Curator, I think, is rather nice. But mono Shurima is the standout as far as existing decks go, because you get your turn 1 disc potentially into a turn 2 Curator, into a turn 3 Hierophant, turn 4 Renekton to start working on leveling him up, and then you go from there. Like, that's your ideal curve in a list like that. But I like that this exists. Now, as we speculate now, this is entirely inference, I don't know anything, but it would be very neat to me personally if this is a bit of a signal that Zilean plays on multiple existing keywords and strategies. Now, what I mean by that is that in the past, so in the first Shurima expansion, where we were introduced to the region, we can see Zilean in the background of the art of some of the cards with the predict feature. And given Zilean's character and even the cinematic that was released today, it's very easy to assume that Zilean was going to further help the kind of predict package and make that become an archetype. But now we're seeing a card that is very clearly supposed to be representing, if you will, the reveal of that we're going to get Zilean, and instead this is advanced. Now that makes sense because you're speeding up time. But what if, hear me out, gang, what if Zilean actually cares about both landmarks and the predict package? How cool would it be if Zilean had some sort of interaction where it's like every time you predict, you also advance your landmarks, and then you could play like a Zilean Talia or a Zilean Lissandra list where you actually care about running Frozen Thralls and the predict package. I would love to see some sort of marriage between the two. I just think that that has a lot of design potential. Now, again, I have no idea if that's what it's going to be, but given that we're seeing an emphasis placed on advancement here, and we know that, again, predict is something that exists and we hope gets future support, I think that would be really neat. So I hope that Malphite has to deal with landmarks and we get more. Basically, I want more reasons to run Talia. I think Talia in a vacuum is a very interesting champion. I think her design is neat, and right now running Talia, at least competitively, just doesn't feel very great. And I want to be able to theory craft and build with her. So I'm hoping that both Chip here and Clockwork Curator means that we're going to see some more support in that area, and then also the predict package. I love the predict package. I think that anytime that you get to, one, smooth out your draws, It's just going to make the game feel a bit more consistent, and so it creates that kind of agency for you as a player. Those micro decisions are a great way for you to showcase skill, essentially, because the more decisions you present a player, the more times you give them the opportunity to do the right thing, to make a good decision. And consistently making decisions that are correct at the right moments, so on and so forth, are basically how you showcase player skill in card games. There's always going to be an element of variance or randomness, and so the way that you quote unquote demonstrate skill is by offering them meaningful decisions and how allowing them to make good ones. And so I love the predict package from a design standpoint. I want to see more reasons to run those cards, etc., etc. So anyway, these were the 3 cards that were revealed. You made it this far. I want to hear, based on just these, without knowing anything about the champions, what champion are you most excited to see? Do you want to see Irelia? Are you hoping that Ionia comes back, or you have a reason to run that? I hope that there's something that Irelia does that makes you care about the number of units attacking, for example, and that these blades help with that. And I want an excuse to run Irelia Zed together, right? Just, again, thinking out loud, thinking about that potential, thinking about my imaginative ways to, build around certain archetypes. I'd love to see that from Irelia. So do you want to see that? Do you want to see a big, monstrous Malphite? Now, I will say my concern is that we already have a late game bomb champ in Targon in Aurelion Sol. And so Malphite, if he's going to also be this monstrous mountain of a champion that's meant to finish games, but based on landmarks, I hope that he feels different enough from Aurelion Sol that it doesn't feel like it's redundant, right? I want the Malphite deck to feel Malphite-y, if that makes sense. Kind of the way that Nautilus is still very unique despite being in Bilgewater, because you're building around deep. I kind of want Malphite to be the landmark version of that. How they accomplish that, I don't know, but that's what I'd like to see. So, do you want to see Irelia? Do you want to see Malphite? Or are you excited to see whatever Zillion does in the past, present, or future? Because he's doing it in all of those places. All right, that's it. Enough of my jokes, enough of my ranting. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. Thank you for watching. As always, if you're new, consider subscribing. I love you. I love you. I love you. I cannot articulate or express how important and meaningful it is to me that people click on these things, even still, because I've bounced around between games and I know that my schedule is inconsistent. And so the fact that anybody watches anything that I have to say, listens to me, etc., it means a lot to me. So thank you. And until next time, may you walk on warm sands.